He designed the perfect trap for human nature. She broke it, with compassion. Now he's hunting the woman who proved him wrong. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're ready to enjoy this story, hit that like button and comment where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories coming. The crystal chandeliers of the Aurelian cast elegant reflections across pristine white tablecloths as Ethan Cross checked his Patek Philippe for the second time in 5 minutes. Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant hummed with the measured conversations of New York's elite, but Ethan registered none of it. His calculating eyes tracked the young black waitress moving between tables with quiet dignity, her posture perfect, despite the exhaustion shadowing her eyes. Ethan Cross had built Crosstech Holdings from a dorm room startup into a tech empire worth billions before his 30th birthday. His ruthless business acumen was legendary, but few knew how the betrayal by his former partner had transformed his once idealistic heart into armor. Tonight, like most nights since the scandal, he dined alone, watching, assessing, testing the world that had taught him trust was for fools. Leah Thompson had worked at the Aurelian for 8 months, perfecting the art of professional invisibility. She moved through the restaurant like a shadow, serving the wealthy and powerful while they barely acknowledged her existence. Tonight was no different, except for the man at table 12, whose cold eyes hadn't stopped following her since he arrived. "Your Bordeaux, sir?" Leah placed the wine glass on the table with steady hands, though her pulse quickened under his intense scrutiny. "Thank you." His voice was measured, controlled, carrying the confidence of someone who'd never worried about a bill in his life. "Have you worked here long?" The question caught her off guard. Customers rarely inquired about her life. "Almost a year, sir." Leah kept her eyes down, professional, distant. She'd learned early that engaging with men like him led nowhere good. "Will there be anything else?" Ethan leaned back, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "No, that will be all." She nodded and retreated, feeling his gaze follow her across the room. What she didn't see was Ethan deliberately sliding his black Amex Centurion card under his napkin before standing to leave 20 minutes later, walking out without settling his $400 bill. His assistant watched discreetly from across the room, recording every detail of the experiment. Leah discovered the card 15 minutes after his departure, her heart stopping when she realized what it was. The infamous black card, unlimited credit, the ultimate symbol of wealth and power. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it, the weight of possibility heavy in her palm. "Leah." Her manager appeared beside her, table 12 left without paying. She held up the card, making her decision in that instant. "He forgot his card. I'll return it tomorrow morning." The manager frowned. "That's Ethan Cross's card. We can't afford problems with someone like him." "I understand." The words felt hollow as the plan formed in her mind. She finished her shift at midnight, her feet aching and back stiff from hours of navigating between tables. The October air cut through her thin jacket as she stepped onto Fifth Avenue, the black card burning like a brand in her pocket. She could pay her grandmother's overdue medical bills, her brother's tuition, maybe even afford a decent apartment instead of the cramped Brooklyn walk-up they shared. The flickering lights of the Jefferson Youth Center caught her attention as she walked toward the subway. Through the windows, she could see children hunched over books, studying by flashlight during another power outage. She'd seen them before, the same kids her younger brother joined 3 afternoons a week while she worked double shifts. The same center that had lost its funding last month. "Miss Thompson," a small voice called out, as a boy of about 10 recognized her through the window. The lights went out again. The black card seemed to pulse in her pocket, demanding attention. She could use it for her family, or she could use it for something that might actually matter to more than just herself. The decision crystallized with surprising clarity. "Wait right there," she called back. "I'm going to fix that." The late-night hardware store on Lexington Avenue blazed with fluorescent light. Leah moved through the aisles with purpose, selecting industrial LED fixtures, extension cords, power strips, and tablets loaded with educational software. The pile grew until her shopping cart overflowed. The cashier's eyes widened at the black card. "Ma'am, for purchases over $3,000, I need to see ID and call for authorization." Leah's pulse hammered. This was it. She wasn't buying luxury for herself. She was buying light for children who needed it. But would that matter when they caught her? What she didn't know was that Ethan Cross was already watching the transaction unfold on his phone, his finger hovering over the decline button as his experiment reached its critical moment. The transaction approved with a soft electronic chime. Leah exhaled, relief washing over her as she signed the receipt and wrote, "For those who need a little brightness," on the memo line. She had no idea that miles away, in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Ethan Cross was staring at his phone in disbelief. This wasn't how his experiments usually ended. Since Jordan Wells had embezzled millions from their charity startup 2 years ago, destroying both their friendship and Ethan's faith in humanity, these tests had become his bitter hobby, each one confirming his darkest suspicions about human nature. Until tonight. Until her. He tapped his assistant's number, his voice tight with confusion. "Find out everything about Leah Thompson, and get the car ready. I need to see exactly what she's doing with my money." As the elevator descended to his private garage, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. He'd designed this test to expose another thief, not to find the one person who might prove him wrong. The checkout counter at Brooklyn Hardware and Supply felt like a confessional booth. Leah's fingers trembled as she slid the sleek black card across the counter, her heart hammering against her ribs. The cashier, a middle-aged man with skeptical eyes, examined the card, then her face. "Ethan Cross? As in Crosstech Holdings?" His eyebrows arched toward his hairline. "I'm his assistant." The lie tasted bitter, but Leah maintained eye contact. "He authorized this purchase for a community project." The cashier shrugged. "Not my business who spends what, but this'll need a signature verification." The terminal beeped, processing the $3,487 charge. Each second stretched like taffy as Leah waited, rehearsing excuses for when the transaction declined. Instead, the machine chirped its approval. "Receipt?" the cashier asked. Leah nodded, accepting the slip of paper. In the memo field, she carefully wrote, "For those who need a little brightness." She wasn't sure why. Perhaps as a confession, perhaps as justification. Either way, it felt important to mark this moment. Outside, the night air had grown colder. Leah flagged down a taxi, a luxury she never permitted herself, and directed the driver to load the supplies. The hardware store had agreed to deliver the larger fixtures tomorrow morning, but the tablets, extension cords, and smaller items filled the back seat beside her. "Jefferson Youth Center," she told the driver. "East Brooklyn." As the taxi pulled away from Manhattan's glittering skyline, Leah gazed at the receding lights. Somewhere in one of those gleaming towers, Ethan Cross was probably sleeping in sheets that cost more than her monthly rent, unaware that his forgotten card was bringing light to a place that had existed too long in darkness. The youth center's night custodian, Mr. Reeves, helped her unload the supplies, his weathered face creasing with confusion. "Miss Thompson, what's all this?" "A donation," she said simply. "For the kids. The electrician will come tomorrow with the fixtures." She arranged the tablets on the center's worn tables, each one already loaded with educational software. The food packages, enough for 2 weeks of after-school meals, went into the small kitchen area. Extension cords snaked across the floor, ready to power the new equipment. It was nearly 3 in the morning when she finally returned to her apartment. The one-bedroom walk-up in Flatbush felt especially cramped tonight, the walls thin enough to hear her neighbor's television through them. Her grandmother's medication schedule was taped to the refrigerator, next to her brother's school portrait. Leah collapsed onto her pull-out couch, still wearing her uniform. The black card lay on the coffee table, catching the dim light from the street lamp outside. Tomorrow, she would return it. Tomorrow, she would face the consequences. But tonight, for the first time in years, she fell asleep without the weight of helplessness pressing on her chest. Morning at the Jefferson Youth Center brought transformation. The electrician Leah had hired arrived promptly at 8, installing the industrial LED fixtures throughout the main room, study areas, and computer lab. The center's director, Ms. Washington, stood in the doorway with her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face as the rooms brightened, one by one. "How?" was all she could manage. Leah smiled. "An anonymous donor." By 3 o'clock, children began arriving for the after-school program. Their reactions made every risk worthwhile. 10-year-old Marcus, her brother's friend, spun in circles beneath the bright lights, his laughter echoing off the walls. Teenage girls clustered around the new tablets, exclaiming over educational apps they'd never had access to before. Leah had taken the day off from the restaurant, a luxury that would cost her, to help distribute the first hot meal many of these children would have all week. Her brother Jamal arrived at 4, his backpack slung over one shoulder, stopping short at the center's entrance. "Leah, what happened here?" She pulled him into a hug. "A miracle," she whispered. "Just enjoy it." Across town, in the steel and glass headquarters of Crosstech Holdings, Ethan Cross stared at his phone screen, brow furrowed. The notification had come through at 6:42 a.m. 3,487.53, charged to his personal black card at Brooklyn Hardware and Supply, followed by smaller charges at a grocery wholesaler. "Get me everything on these transactions," he instructed his assistant, Rebecca, "and find out what's at this address." Within an hour, Rebecca returned with a file. "It's a youth center in East Brooklyn, sir. Serves about 60 kids daily, mostly from low-income households. They've been struggling since their funding was cut last quarter." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And the woman? Leah Thompson?" 26 years old, works at the Aurelian to support her younger brother and grandmother. The grandmother has multiple sclerosis. Medical bills have drained their savings. The brother attends that same youth center after school. Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, tapping his fingers against the armrest. This wasn't the typical pattern. Usually when he ran these tests, the card would be used for luxury items, designer clothes, electronics, sometimes even cash advances. Easy to track, easy to prosecute. But this was different. "Have my car brought around," he said finally. "I want to see this place myself." The black Bentley looked absurdly out of place on the potholed street outside the Jefferson Youth Center. Ethan adjusted his custom Tom Ford suit as he stepped onto the cracked sidewalk, ignoring the curious stares from passers-by. Rebecca had briefed him on the drive over. The youth center occupied a converted warehouse space, offering after-school programs, meals, and academic support to neighborhood children. Its funding had been slashed when the city reallocated its budget, ironically, to provide tax incentives for businesses like his own. Ethan entered without announcing himself, standing in the shadows near the entrance. The space was transformed from what he'd seen in the photos Rebecca had shown him. New lights illuminated every corner, children clustered around tablets, and the smell of hot food filled the air. In the center of it all stood Leah Thompson, serving meals with the same quiet grace she'd shown at the Aurelian, but with something new in her expression: joy. He watched her interact with the children, learning their names, asking about their days. This wasn't charity as performance. This was genuine care. Something uncomfortable stirred in Ethan's chest, an emotion he'd buried beneath cynicism and suspicion. For so long he barely recognized it. Shame. A small boy tugged at Leah's sleeve, pointing toward the entrance. She looked up, her eyes meeting Ethan's across the room. Recognition flashed, followed by resignation. She said something to an older woman beside her, then walked toward him with her head held high. Ethan stepped outside, and she followed. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as they faced each other. "You used my card," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Leah didn't flinch. "I did, to make a difference." "Why?" The question contained multitudes. Why risk prosecution? Why choose this place? Why care so much? Her answer was simple, but devastating in its clarity. Because you could afford to test people. They can't afford to fail. The words hit him like a physical blow. In his world of calculated risks and strategic moves, he'd forgotten what it meant to act purely from compassion. He'd been testing humanity and finding it wanting, because he'd been looking in all the wrong places. "How did you know?" he asked. "That it was a test?" "People like you don't forget black cards," she said. "And people like you don't look at people like me unless you want something." Her directness stripped away his practiced defenses. Standing there in his $3,000 suit, beside a woman who worked double shifts to keep her family afloat, Ethan felt the absurdity of his experiment. He'd been playing games with people's lives, all to confirm his bitter worldview. "You could have bought anything," he said finally. "Why this?" Leah glanced back at the center, where children's laughter spilled through the open windows. "Because some things matter more than money. Those kids needed light more than I needed. Whatever I could have bought." Ethan had prepared for this confrontation, rehearsed the stern lecture about theft, the magnanimous decision not to press charges if she returned the card. He'd expected excuses, perhaps tears. He hadn't expected to be the one left speechless. For the first time in years, the walls he'd built around himself began to crack. Not from force, but from the gentle pressure of unexpected integrity. "I was going to return the card tomorrow," Leah continued, reaching into her pocket. "You can have it back now." She held out the black card, offering it with the same dignity with which she'd served his wine. Ethan stared at it, then at her, seeing clearly what his cynicism had blinded him to: courage that had nothing to do with wealth or power. He didn't take the card. 3 days passed before Ethan returned to the Aurelian. He requested table 12 again, his gaze following Leah as she moved between tables with practiced grace. When she approached, her expression remained professionally neutral, though her eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there before. "Good evening, Mr. Cross." "Ms. Thompson." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Would you join me, just for a moment?" She glanced toward her manager, who nodded slightly. The restaurant was nearly empty. Tuesday evenings were slow, and Ethan Cross was not a man anyone refused. "I'm working, sir." "I've spoken with your manager. You're on break for the next 15 minutes. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Please." Leah sat, her posture rigid. If this is about the card, it's about the youth center. Ethan placed a leather portfolio on the table. I'd like to help. He opened it to reveal documents, a sponsorship proposal for the Jefferson Youth Center. The figure at the bottom made Leah's eyes widen. $100,000? Initial funding, with quarterly reviews for additional support. Ethan leaned forward. No strings attached. Leah's gaze hardened. Charity as penance? Perhaps. His honesty surprised them both. Or perhaps you showed me something worth investing in. The children don't need your guilt money, Mr. Cross. Then what do they need? The question hung between them. Leah studied him, searching for the trap. Finding none, she answered truthfully. Consistency. People who show up, who see them as more than a tax write-off or a feel-good story. Ethan nodded slowly. Then that's what I'll provide. You'll write a check and disappear. No. He closed the portfolio. I'll show up, starting this Saturday, 9 a.m. Leah almost laughed. You're going to volunteer? At a youth center in East Brooklyn? Is that so hard to believe? Yes. The word was simple but absolute. Ethan extended his hand across the table. Then I'll have to prove you wrong. After a moment's hesitation, Leah shook it. His grip was firm, his skin warm against hers. Saturday, she said. Don't wear the suit. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Ethan arrived at the youth center at 8:45 a.m. that Saturday. He'd traded his usual attire for dark jeans and a simple gray sweater, though the casual clothes still probably cost more than Leah's monthly rent. The children regarded him with open curiosity as Leah introduced him simply as Mr. Cross, our new volunteer. No mention of his wealth or status, no special treatment. That first day, he painted walls. His technique was terrible, but his determination unwavering. By afternoon, his sweater was splattered with pale blue, and he'd learned the names of 6 children who'd appointed themselves his supervisors. You missed a spot, 10-year-old Marcus informed him solemnly, pointing to a corner near the ceiling. Perhaps you should show me how it's done, Ethan replied, offering the brush. Leah, observing from across the room, couldn't help but smile at the sight of a billionaire CEO being instructed in proper painting technique by a 4th grader. The following weekend, Ethan returned with programming textbooks. The weekend after that, he helped install new computers, donated anonymously, though Leah knew their source. Each Saturday, he arrived precisely at 8:45 a.m., stayed until closing, and never once mentioned his donation proposal again. Why do you keep coming back? Leah asked one evening in late November. They were the last 2 at the center, cleaning up after a Thanksgiving celebration for families who couldn't afford their own. Ethan considered the question as he stacked chairs. It reminds me of something I'd forgotten. What's that? Purpose beyond profit. He smiled ruefully. Sounds trite, doesn't it? Only if you don't mean it. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the barrier between them thinning with each shared task. My parents died when I was 19, Leah said suddenly. Car accident. I became Jamal's guardian overnight. He was only 9. Ethan paused, a chair suspended mid-lift. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't. I dropped out of college, took whatever jobs I could find. She shrugged. You do what you have to do for family. Is that why you work at the Aurelian? The tips? Leah nodded. And the flexible hours. Allows me to be there when Jamal needs me. She glanced at him. What about your family? Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Complicated. Isn't everyone's? He set down the chair and leaned against the wall. My father built his business by stepping on anyone in his path, including his family. My mother left when I was 12. I haven't spoken to either of them in years. So you built your own empire to prove something to him? Ethan's laugh held no humor. Psychoanalyzing me, Ms. Thompson? Just connecting dots, Mr. Cross. Their eyes met across the room, understanding passing between them. Two people shaped by absence, by responsibilities, shouldered too young. I started Crosstech with my best friend from college, Ethan said quietly. Jordan Wells. We had this idea about technology for social good, connecting resources to communities that needed them most. What happened? Jordan happened. He embezzled millions from our charitable foundation, disappeared with the money, left me to explain to donors, to the board, to the communities we'd promised to help. The old bitterness crept into his voice. I trusted him completely. And you haven't trusted anyone since, Leah concluded. Ethan's silence was confirmation enough. December brought snow and a gradual thawing between them. Their conversations extended beyond the youth center, books they'd read, places they hoped to visit, dreams deferred but not abandoned. Ethan found himself looking forward to their exchanges, to her unflinching honesty and quiet strength. For her part, Leah began to see beyond the billionaire facade to the man beneath, brilliant but wounded, powerful yet isolated. She caught herself watching him with the children, noting the gentleness in hands that commanded empires. One Saturday, they walked through Brooklyn's snowy streets after the center closed, neither wanting the day to end. Their breath clouded in the cold air as they talked about everything and nothing. You never went back to school? Ethan asked. Leah shook her head. I've applied for scholarships, but... She hesitated. My credit was destroyed by medical bills after my grandmother's diagnosis. No financial aid committee wants to take that risk. What would you study? Social work. I want to help kids, like the ones at Jefferson. Her eyes brightened with passion. Create programs that actually work, that see them as whole people, not just statistics. Ethan nodded, filing away this information without comment. They stopped at a small cafe, warming their hands around steaming mugs. The easy conversation, the shared laughter, it felt dangerously close to something neither was ready to name. Thank you, Ethan said suddenly. For what? For not letting me pay my way out of involvement. His eyes held hers. For making me show up. Leah smiled. You're welcome. The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged. Ethan leaned forward slightly, then caught himself. It's getting late, he said, breaking the spell. I should get you home. What Leah didn't tell him was that she'd received another scholarship rejection that morning, her third this year. Or that Ms. Washington had confided in her about rumors of redevelopment in the neighborhood, threatening the youth center's already precarious existence. The center operated on city property under a special lease program for nonprofits. That lease was coming up for renewal in February, and developers were circling, promising the city higher tax revenue if the land were rezoned for commercial use. She kept these worries to herself, not wanting to burden the fragile trust growing between them, not wanting to be another person asking Ethan Cross for money. Meanwhile, in the gleaming boardroom of Crosstech Holdings, Ethan faced mounting pressure from his executive team. The company's aggressive growth strategy required new office space for their expanding workforce. The Brooklyn Innovation Corridor project is perfect, explained Victor Reeves, his chief strategy officer. Tax incentives from the city, excellent location, and we'd be the anchor tenant. Ethan reviewed the proposal, his attention caught by a familiar street name in the development zone. This includes the area around Jefferson Street? Several blocks in that area, yes, Victor confirmed. Mostly underutilized properties, a few nonprofits that can be relocated. The city's eager to transform that neighborhood. I'll need to review this further, Ethan said, closing the file. No decisions until after the holidays. Victor frowned. Sir, we need to move quickly. Other developers are interested. I said I'll review it. Ethan's tone ended the discussion. Later, alone in his office, Ethan spread out the development maps. There it was, the Jefferson Youth Center, marked for community space relocation. The very place where he'd spent every Saturday for the past 2 months. The place that had begun to heal something broken inside him. He thought of Leah's face if she knew. The betrayal she would feel. The confirmation of her worst suspicions about men like him. The fragile trust between them would shatter. Ethan closed the file, a decision forming in his mind. He wouldn't let that happen. Not to the center, not to the children who depended on it, not to Leah. The last Saturday before Christmas, they stayed late decorating the center for the holiday party. Colored lights twinkled around windows, paper snowflakes hung from the ceiling, and the scent of pine filled the air from the small tree in the corner. Admit it, Leah teased, watching Ethan struggle with a tangled string of lights. This is more satisfying than closing a billion-dollar deal. Marginally, he conceded with a smile that transformed his face. When they finished, they stood in the center of the room, admiring their work. The space glowed with warmth and possibility. It's beautiful, Leah whispered. Yes, Ethan agreed, but he wasn't looking at the decorations. For the first time in years, he felt something dangerous and wonderful unfurling in his chest. Trust. Not just in Leah, but in the possibility that not everyone would betray him. That connection was worth the risk of pain. For her part, Leah found herself believing in Ethan Cross, not the billionaire, but the man who showed up every Saturday without fail, who remembered children's names and favorite books, who listened to her dreams without judgment. Neither spoke of the growing attraction between them, the electric awareness that hummed whenever they stood close. Neither mentioned the way their hands had brushed while hanging ornaments, or how neither had pulled away, and neither knew that across town, developers were finalizing plans that would soon force them to choose between loyalty and love, between past wounds and future possibilities. The storm was gathering, invisible on this night of twinkling lights and newfound trust. January brought bitter cold to Brooklyn, and an announcement that froze Leah's heart mid-beat. She was scrolling through local news on her phone during her morning bus commute when the headline caught her eye. Cross Tech Holdings acquires East Brooklyn block for new tech campus. The accompanying image showed a sleek glass building where the Jefferson Youth Center currently stood. Leah's fingers trembled as she tapped the article, scanning for details with growing horror. Acquisition finalized yesterday. Community spaces to be relocated. Groundbreaking ceremony scheduled for March. CEO Ethan Cross praised the development as revitalization of an underserved area. Beneath the article was a photo of Ethan in his corporate armor, tailored suit, confident smile, shaking hands with the mayor. He looked nothing like the man who had spent Christmas Eve helping children decorate cookies, who had laughed when frosting ended up in his hair. The bus lurched to a stop, but Leah remained seated, numb with betrayal. All those Saturdays, all those conversations, all those moments she'd thought were genuine connection. Had they been research? a billionaire's field trip to understand the community he planned to displace. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ms. Washington. Emergency meeting at the center, 10 a.m. It's bad. The youth center hummed with anxious energy. Parents, volunteers, and staff huddled in small groups, their voices a mixture of anger and despair. Ms. Washington stood at the front, trying to maintain calm. "We've been given 60 days' notice," she explained, her usual composure cracking. "The city claims they'll help us relocate, but there's no guarantee of comparable space or rent." "What about the children?" someone asked. "Where will they go after school?" "The nearest center is 30 blocks away. Many families can't manage that distance." Leah stood in the back, fury building with each word. This wasn't just about a building. It was about stability for kids who had precious little of it, about a safe haven in a neighborhood where such spaces were vanishing. "Has anyone spoken to Ethan Cross?" she asked, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "He's been volunteering here for months." Ms. Washington's expression darkened. "We've tried. His office says he's unavailable." "Convenient," Leah muttered. A reporter from the Brooklyn Daily approached her afterward. "You mentioned Ethan Cross. Do you know him personally?" Leah hesitated, then nodded sharply. "Yes. He's been coming here every Saturday since November, playing the savior while planning to destroy us." "Would you be willing to comment on record?" Something reckless and wounded took over. "Absolutely." Ethan was in the middle of a budget meeting when his assistant burst in, tablet in hand. "Sir, you need to see this." The screen showed a live news feed outside the Jefferson Youth Center. Leah stood before microphones, her expression a mixture of hurt and rage. "Pretended to care about these children, while his company planned to demolish their safe space," she was saying. "If that's not the definition of corporate hypocrisy, I don't know what is." The reporter thrust the microphone closer. "Are you suggesting Mr. Cross deliberately misled the community?" "I'm saying he looked these children in the eyes every Saturday, learned their names, heard their stories, all while knowing they were just obstacles to his next profit center." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "End the meeting," he ordered, already reaching for his phone. His call to Leah went straight to voicemail. His chief financial officer lingered as others filed out. "Sir, about these allegations." "What allegations?" "That we're developing property in East Brooklyn?" "That's just it." The CFO looked uncomfortable. "I wasn't aware we had finalized that acquisition." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Neither was I." By evening, the story had exploded across social media. #CrossTechBetrayal trended on Twitter, alongside photos of Ethan at the youth center juxtaposed with renderings of the proposed development. His PR team scrambled to control the damage, but the narrative had already taken hold. Billionaire uses charity work as cover for corporate expansion. Ethan's car idled outside Leah's apartment building in Flatbush. He'd been waiting for 30 minutes when she finally appeared, walking quickly with her collar turned up against the cold. "Leah!" he called, stepping out onto the sidewalk. She froze, then continued walking, faster now. "Please," he said, catching up to her. 5 minutes. "I have nothing to say to you." "Then just listen." He moved to block her path, maintaining enough distance to not seem threatening. "I didn't know about the acquisition. I swear to you." Leah laughed bitterly. "You're the CEO. You expect me to believe you don't know what your own company is buying? It's complicated. No, it's actually very simple." Her eyes flashed with hurt. "You used us. You used me. Was it entertaining, slumming with the poor folks? Getting material for your next TED Talk on corporate social responsibility? That's not what happened." Then explain it to me, Ethan. Explain how your company is demolishing a center you supposedly care about. I'm trying to stop it. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. The board moved forward without my approval. I only found out today, when you did. Convenient timing. It's the truth. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. Leah, look at me. Have I ever lied to you? She met his gaze, searching for deception and finding only desperation. For a moment, doubt flickered across her face. I resigned from the Aurelian today, she said finally, and I told Ms. Washington I can't work with you anymore at the center. The words hit him like physical blows. Leah, even if you didn't know, she continued, you're still Ethan Cross. You still have the power to make this go away, and you haven't. Actions matter more than intentions. She stepped around him and continued walking. This time, he didn't follow. Back at Crosstech headquarters, Ethan initiated a full investigation into the Brooklyn acquisition. What he discovered sent ice through his veins. The deal had been orchestrated by a shadow board committee, led by Victor Reeves, who had direct ties to Jordan Wells, Ethan's former partner and betrayer. The paper trail revealed a complex scheme: acquire the Brooklyn property at below market rates, force Ethan to publicly defend the unpopular development, then use the resulting PR crisis to challenge his leadership. The ultimate goal: push Ethan out and install Victor as CEO. They've been planning this for months, Rebecca explained, spreading documents across his desk. The youth center wasn't an accident. It was the target. They knew you were volunteering there. How? You've been followed. There are photos. She hesitated before showing him surveillance images. Ethan painting walls with children, walking with Leah through snowy streets, laughing together at the cafe. Rage and betrayal coursed through him, familiar companions he'd thought he'd left behind. But beneath them burned something new, determination to protect what mattered. Options? He asked tersely. Legally, the board has authority to approve acquisitions of this size without your explicit consent. The paperwork is airtight. So I can't stop it? Rebecca hesitated. Not without significant personal cost. Ethan stood at his office window, staring at the Manhattan skyline. Crosstech was his life's work, 15 years of relentless drive, of proving himself, of building something meaningful from the ashes of his first betrayal. And now he faced an impossible choice: his empire or his integrity. The image of children studying under the lights Leah had bought with his card flashed in his mind. The sound of her voice saying, "Because you could afford to test people, they can't afford to fail." He thought of his own words to her. Purpose beyond profit. Had they been empty? Or was he brave enough to live by them? Schedule an emergency board meeting, he told Rebecca, and after that, a press conference. The Crosstech boardroom crackled with tension. 14 board members sat around the polished table, with Victor Reeves at the far end, opposite Ethan. This emergency session of the board is now in session, announced the corporate secretary. Ethan remained standing, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp as steel. I'll be brief, he began. I've discovered evidence of conspiracy, corporate espionage, and breach of fiduciary duty among members of this board. Murmurs rippled through the room. Victor's smile didn't waver. Bold accusations, Ethan. I assume you have proof? Extensive. Ethan nodded to Rebecca, who distributed folders to each member, including documentation of your ongoing collaboration with Jordan Wells, a man barred from any association with this company. The color drained from Victor's face. The Brooklyn acquisition was never about expansion, Ethan continued. It was about creating a PR crisis you could use to force me out. That's absurd, Victor sputtered. The development makes perfect financial sense. I'm not finished. Ethan's voice cut like a blade. You targeted the Jefferson Youth Center specifically because you knew I volunteered there. You had me followed, photographed. You used children as pawns in a corporate power play. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, looking through the evidence with growing concern. Even if true, said Victor, regaining composure, the acquisition has been finalized. The contracts are signed. The announcement is made. Yes, Ethan agreed, and that brings me to the purpose of this meeting. He placed a single document on the table. This is my resignation as CEO of Crosstech Holdings, effective immediately. Shocked silence filled the room. Additionally, he continued, I am exercising my founder's rights to liquidate my controlling interest, approximately 43% of company shares. You can't be serious, gasped the CFO. That would devastate our stock price. I'm entirely serious. Ethan's voice was calm. I'm selling my shares to establish a community trust that will purchase and permanently protect the Jefferson Youth Center property, along with surrounding blocks currently targeted for revitalization. Victor stood, face contorted with rage. You're destroying the company over a rundown youth center? Over some waitress? No, Ethan replied evenly. I'm choosing integrity over empire, something I should have done long ago. He gathered his papers and walked to the door, pausing before exiting. One more thing. The FBI will be arriving shortly to discuss potential securities fraud charges. I suggest you all cooperate fully. An hour later, Ethan stood before a forest of microphones outside Crosstech headquarters. Camera flashes illuminated his face as reporters shouted questions. He raised a hand for silence, his expression resolute. Today I resigned as CEO of Crosstech Holdings, he began. I can no longer lead a company whose actions contradict its stated values. The crowd erupted with questions. Ethan waited for quiet before continuing. I've discovered that certain board members orchestrated the East Brooklyn acquisition specifically to target community spaces like the Jefferson Youth Center, not for legitimate business purposes, but as part of a scheme to undermine my leadership. He paused, his gaze finding a familiar face at the back of the crowd. Leah stood watching, her expression unreadable. I apologize to the Jefferson community for the distress this has caused. I promise that not only will the center remain intact, but it will be protected permanently through a community land trust I'm establishing with my personal funds. More shouting, more questions. Ethan ignored them all, speaking directly to the cameras, and through them, to Leah. Sometimes, he said quietly, to rebuild something true, you have to burn down what's false. The aftermath of Ethan's press conference unfolded like a hurricane in slow motion. Financial networks broadcast his resignation on continuous loop. Crosstech's stock plummeted 28% in a single day, and #EthanCrossWalkaway became the top trending topic nationwide. Business analysts called it corporate suicide. Social commentators labeled it billionaire redemption theater. For Ethan, watching from his penthouse as his 15-year legacy imploded, none of that mattered. He'd made his choice. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since he'd walked off the podium. Investors demanded explanations, journalists sought exclusives, and board members alternated between threats and desperate pleas. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the only call that hadn't come, from Leah. She had been there, at the back of the crowd, He'd seen recognition flash across her face when he'd quoted her words about truth and falsehood. But afterward, she'd disappeared into the throng of reporters, leaving Ethan with the hollow victory of doing the right thing too late. The FBI investigation moved with surprising speed. Agents descended on Crosstech headquarters the morning after Ethan's resignation, armed with warrants for financial records, emails, and board meeting minutes. By week's end, Victor Reeves and 3 other board members were facing federal charges for securities fraud, conspiracy, and insider trading. More damning still was the discovery of direct communications between Victor and Jordan Wells, Ethan's original betrayer, revealing a scheme years in the making. They had targeted the Jefferson Youth Center specifically because of its emotional significance to Ethan, calculating that the ensuing PR disaster would force him to defend unpopular corporate actions, weakening his position with both the board and the public. "They studied you," explained Special Agent Diaz during a debriefing in Ethan's attorney's office. "They knew your pattern of testing people with your credit card. They knew which restaurant you frequented. They even had profiles on the staff there." "Including Leah Thompson," Ethan said quietly. Agent Diaz nodded. "They didn't anticipate what she would do with the card, or how you would respond to her." The revelation that he had been manipulated, that even his cynical tests had been observed and exploited, left Ethan feeling hollowed out. His walls hadn't protected him. They had made him predictable. Leah followed the unfolding scandal from a distance, consuming news articles and financial analyses with voracious intensity. Each new revelation forced her to recalibrate her understanding of what had happened and of Ethan himself. "You should talk to him," Jamal suggested one evening, finding her poring over yet another article about Crosstech's implosion. "He lied to me," she said automatically, though the words felt increasingly hollow. "Did he?" Her brother raised an eyebrow. "Seems like he's the one who got played, and then blew up his own company to make it right." Leah sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's complicated. Only because you're making it that way." Jamal shrugged with the simple clarity of youth. The man gave up billions for a youth center. Our youth center. That's pretty straightforward. But nothing felt straightforward anymore. Leah's anger had curdled into confusion, then bloomed into something more complex. Admiration tangled with guilt, attraction shadowed by lingering doubt. She'd been so quick to believe the worst of him, so ready to see the billionaire mask rather than the man she'd come to know over shared meals and late-night conversations. Had she been any better than those who had betrayed him before? 3 weeks after his resignation, Ethan finalized the creation of the East Brooklyn Community Trust, a nonprofit entity funded by the liquidation of his Crosstech holdings. The trust purchased not only the Jefferson Youth Center property, but the surrounding 5 blocks, with legally binding provisions, ensuring the land would remain dedicated to community use in perpetuity. The media circus intensified. Business publications decried his irrational destruction of shareholder value, while progressive outlets celebrated the unprecedented transfer of corporate wealth to community ownership. Everyone wanted to know, was Ethan Kross having a breakdown, executing a brilliant long-game strategy, or genuinely transforming from corporate predator to community advocate? Ethan ignored the speculation. He'd spent his adult life building walls to protect himself from betrayal, constructing an empire of wealth and power as armor against vulnerability. Now, with those walls demolished by his own hand, he felt strangely, terrifyingly free. On a crisp February morning, the Jefferson Youth Center reopened with little fanfare. No press release, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, Just doors unlocked at 9 a.m. as usual, welcoming children and families back to a space that had nearly been lost. Leah arrived early to help Ms. Washington prepare. She'd been avoiding the center since the scandal broke, her complicated feelings about Ethan making it difficult to separate the place from the man. But Jamal had insisted on returning to his tutoring program, and Ms. Washington had called twice, asking for her help with the reopening. "We've missed you," Ms. Washington said, embracing her. "The children keep asking when you're coming back." Leah smiled tightly. "I've missed them too." They worked in comfortable silence, arranging books and setting up activity stations. The center looked the same as always, worn but welcoming, the bright lights Leah had purchased with Ethan's card still illuminating every corner. "He's been here every day, you know," Ms. Washington said casually, too casually. "Ethan, working with the contractors, making sure everything was perfect for reopening." Leah's hands stilled over the books she was arranging. "I didn't know. He asked about you several times." Before Leah could respond, the front door opened. Children's voices filled the space, exclamations of delight echoing as they discovered their beloved center unchanged. Jamal entered with Marcus and 2 other boys, immediately heading for the computer lab. Leah retreated to the small kitchen area, needing a moment to compose herself. Through the serving window, she watched the center come alive with activity. Her gaze caught on an unfamiliar figure, kneeling beside the youngest children in the reading corner, helping them select books. It took her a moment to recognize Ethan. Gone was the tailored suit, the CEO posture. He wore faded jeans and a simple Henley, his hair slightly longer than before, his face more relaxed despite new lines of fatigue around his eyes. He looked both less and more like himself, diminished in status, but expanded in humanity. A small girl climbed into his lap with a book, and he began reading to her, his voice soft but animated. Other children gathered around, drawn by the story and his undivided attention. Leah watched, transfixed by this version of Ethan, the man who had sacrificed an empire for this moment, for these children, for this place of light and possibility. She didn't realize she was staring until he looked up, his eyes finding hers across the room. Something flickered in his expression, hope, perhaps, or simple recognition. He nodded once, then returned his attention to the children, giving her space to decide what happened next. Hours passed. Leah immersed herself in work, helping with lunch service and afternoon activities. She and Ethan orbited each other carefully, professional and distant, though she felt his awareness of her like a physical touch. As evening approached and the center emptied of children, they found themselves alone in the main room. Ethan stood by the windows, watching the last streaks of sunset paint Brooklyn's skyline. "Thank you," Leah said finally, breaking the silence, "for saving this place." He turned, his expression unreadable. "I didn't do it for gratitude." "I know." She stepped closer. "That's why it matters." Something in the air between them shifted, the careful distance collapsing. "I should have trusted you," she admitted. "When you said you didn't know about the acquisition, I was too quick to believe that I was like every other powerful man who'd made promises." Ethan finished gently. "You had every reason to doubt me, Leah. But I knew you, the real you." Her voice caught, "And I still assumed the worst. We both have trust issues." A small smile touched his lips. Occupational hazard of being betrayed. The simple acknowledgement that they shared this wound, this wariness, eased something tight in Leah's chest. "What happens now?" she asked. "With Crosstech, with everything you built?" Ethan shrugged, the gesture startlingly casual for a man who had just dismantled a billion-dollar company. Crosstech will survive under new leadership, diminished but intact. And you? I'm starting over. He reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope, with something that matters more. He held it out to her. Leah hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing his in the exchange. Inside was a familiar black credit card, the same one she'd found under his napkin months ago. The one that had started everything. I don't understand, she said, looking up at him. I don't drop tests anymore, Ethan said quietly. I drop chances, for people who prove they deserve them. Beneath the card was a document, Articles of Incorporation for the Ethan Cross Foundation for Community Hope. Leah scanned it, her breath catching when she saw her own name listed as co-director. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything. Ethan's eyes held hers. You're the one who showed me what real integrity looks like, Leah. What purpose beyond profit means. I need your vision for this foundation to work. I don't have experience running a foundation. You have experience with what matters. Seeing people, not problems. Building community, not just buildings. He gestured around them. This center exists because you chose light over luxury. Imagine what you could do with real resources behind that instinct. Leah stared at the document, possibilities unfolding in her mind. Programs she'd dreamed of implementing. Support systems for families like hers. Educational opportunities for children like Jamal. The foundation will fund your education too, Ethan added softly, if you still want to pursue that social work degree. Her eyes snapped to his. How did you? I listen when you talk. The simple statement carried weight beyond its words. Leah looked down at the black card, then back at the man who had once used it as a cynical test of human nature. The man who had lost everything, but found himself in the process. Why me? She asked finally. After everything that happened, all the things I said to the press, because you were right to question me, right to hold me accountable. Ethan stepped closer. Because you see me, not the billionaire, not the CEO, just me. The truth of his words resonated between them. She did see him, his flaws and strengths, his wounds and his courage. Just as he saw her, not as a charity case or a moral lesson, but as a whole person worthy of partnership. I'll need time to think about it, she said, though they both heard the acceptance in her voice. Ethan nodded. Take all the time you need. The distance between them had narrowed to inches. Leah could see the flecks of amber in his gray eyes, the slight unevenness of his breathing. For weeks, she'd held her hurt like armor, keeping him at bay. Now, with truth between them, that armor felt unnecessary. She moved first, closing the final space between them. The embrace was tentative at first, her arms around his waist, his hands light on her back. Then something released in both of them, and they held each other properly, tightly, desperately. It wasn't a romantic embrace. Not yet. It was recognition of shared wounds, of mutual redemption, of two people who had found in each other the courage to trust again. I'm sorry, she whispered against his shoulder. So am I, he murmured into her hair. Outside, Brooklyn's lights began to twinkle in the gathering darkness. Inside the Jefferson Youth Center, saved, protected, permanent, two people held on to each other, neither willing to be the first to let go. Autumn painted Brooklyn in amber and gold, marking a full year since a black card changed two lives forever. The Jefferson Youth Center hummed with activity, no longer just an after-school haven, but the vibrant headquarters of the Cross Foundation for Community Hope. What had begun as a single preserved building had expanded to encompass an entire block of community-focused development. The original center, now renovated, a family health clinic, a workforce development program, and affordable housing units under construction across the street. In her new office, once a storage closet, now a modest but sunlit space, Leah Thompson reviewed scholarship applications for the Foundation's education initiative. Her own diploma hung on the wall beside her desk, the ink barely dry on her Bachelor of Social Work degree. Next fall, she would begin her master's program while continuing to direct the Foundation's youth programs. A knock at her door pulled her attention from the paperwork. Ethan leaned against the door frame, watching her with quiet admiration. "The coding class is about to start," he reminded her. "You promised to stop by." Leah smiled, setting aside her work. "I did, didn't I?" They walked together through corridors now familiar to them both. Their shoulders brushed occasionally, a casual intimacy neither rushed nor avoided. The past year had transformed them, individually and together, in ways neither could have predicted. After the youth center's reopening, they had approached their new partnership with careful professionalism, both wary of the fragile trust rebuilding between them. The Foundation demanded their full attention, programs to develop, staff to hire, communities to engage. They worked long days side by side, learning each other's strengths and accommodating each other's weaknesses. Romance had grown slowly from that fertile ground of mutual respect, a lingering touch here, a shared smile there, late nights talking over takeout food until conversation gave way to something deeper. Their first kiss had come, not in a moment of dramatic passion, but in a quiet instant of recognition. They were better together than apart. Now, watching Ethan guide teenagers through programming basics, Leah marveled at the man he'd become. Gone was the armor of wealth and status he'd once worn like a second skin. In its place was authentic confidence, the kind that came from purpose rather than power. He caught her watching and winked, causing her to blush slightly. Some things hadn't changed, his ability to unsettle her with a single look, for instance. "Ms. Thompson," called Marcus, now 11, and the unofficial leader of the coding group. "Mr. Cross says you're the one who picked these new computers. They're awesome." "He gives me too much credit," Leah replied, moving to join them. "I just approved the budget. He did all the research." "That's called partnership," Ethan said quietly, just for her, sharing credit and blame equally. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning, an acknowledgement of how far they'd come from billionaire and waitress, from tester and subject to true equals in work and life. Later that evening, Ethan caught Leah as she prepared to leave for the day. "I made dinner reservations for tomorrow night," he said casually. "Our anniversary." Leah raised an eyebrow. "Anniversary of what?" "Our first date wasn't until April." "Of when you found my card." His eyes held a mischievous glint. "1 year since you chose light over luxury." "Ah," she smiled, remembering. "That does deserve celebration. Where are we going?" "It's a surprise." He kissed her cheek. "Dress up. I'll pick you up at 7. The following evening, Ethan's car pulled up outside the apartment Leah now shared with her grandmother and brother, a spacious 3-bedroom in a Foundation-owned building, provided as part of her compensation package. She no longer needed to work double shifts to afford rent or medication. Her grandmother had access to quality health care, and Jamal was thriving in his college preparatory program. Leah emerged wearing a simple but elegant black dress, her hair swept up to reveal the graceful line of her neck. Ethan's breath caught at the sight of her. Not just her beauty, but the quiet confidence she carried now, the certainty of her own worth. "You look stunning," he said, helping her into the car. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, straightening his tie with familiar affection. They drove through Manhattan's glittering streets, the conversation flowing easily between them. When the car stopped, Leah looked out the window and froze. "The Aurelian?" She turned to him, surprised. "Really?" "Trust me," Ethan said, taking her hand. The restaurant looked just as it had a year ago. Crystal chandeliers casting elegant reflections across pristine white tablecloths, the quiet murmur of New York's elite creating a sophisticated backdrop. But this time, Leah entered not through the service entrance in uniform, but through the front door on Ethan's arm. The maitre d' greeted them warmly. "Mr. Cross, Ms. Thompson, your table is ready." He led them to table 12, the same table where Ethan had deliberately left his card 1 year ago. Leah's eyes widened in recognition as Ethan held her chair. "Symmetry," he explained, taking his seat across from her. "Full circle." "It feels strange," she admitted, looking around at the restaurant where she had once been invisible. "Being on this side of the experience. Good strange or bad strange?" She considered the question. "Just strange. Like visiting a previous life." The sommelier approached with champagne Ethan had pre-ordered. As they sipped the golden liquid, Leah studied the man across from her, no longer the cold-eyed cynic testing humanity, but the partner who had taught her to trust again. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. "Your old life? Cross-tech?" Ethan's expression turned thoughtful. "I miss aspects of it. The challenge, the scale of impact." He reached across the table for her hand. "But I don't miss who I was then." "And who were you?" "Lonely," he said simply. "Powerful but empty, building walls instead of bridges." Leah squeezed his hand. "And now?" His smile reached his eyes, something that had once been rare but now happened daily. "Now I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly who I'm supposed to be with." The waiter arrived with their appetizers, momentarily pausing the conversation. When they were alone again, Ethan's expression turned more serious. "The foundation received an offer today," he said. "Crosstech wants to fund a major expansion of our tech education program. 7 figures. Nationwide implementation." Leah's eyes widened. "That's incredible. What did you tell them?" "That I needed to discuss it with my co-director." His smile was warm. "With you." The simple statement, his automatic inclusion of her in major decisions, still surprised her sometimes. Their partnership had become so natural, so equal, that moments like these reminded her how rare such balance truly was. "We should consider it," she said thoughtfully, "but with conditions about community input and sustainable funding." Ethan nodded. "Exactly what I was thinking." They continued discussing foundation business through the main course, their conversation flowing seamlessly between professional and personal topics. Anyone observing them would see not a former billionaire and a former waitress, but two people perfectly in sync, challenging and supporting each other in equal measure. As dessert arrived, Ethan grew quieter, a familiar intensity gathering in his eyes. Leah recognized the look. He was building towards something important. "A year ago," he began, "I sat at this table as a different man. I thought I understood the world and my place in it. I thought I knew what mattered." Leah listened, sensing the weight behind his words. "Then you found my card, and instead of buying luxury, you bought light." His voice softened. "You showed me what real integrity looks like, what real purpose feels like." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small envelope, sliding it across the table just as he had once slid his black card under a napkin. Leah's heart quickened as she picked it up. Inside was not a black card, but a white one with gold engraving. Leah Cross. She looked up, questioning. "It's not a credit card," Ethan explained, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "It's a key card to a house in Brooklyn Heights, one I hope you'll share with me." Understanding dawned slowly. "Ethan, you bought light when I expected greed," he continued, reaching across the table to take her hands. "You gave hope when I offered temptation. Now I want to build a lifetime of both. With you." Leah's throat tightened with emotion. "Are you proposing?" "I'm asking if you'll consider sharing your life with mine, officially." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "We can call it whatever you want. Marriage, partnership, a merger of compatible interests." She laughed softly at the last option. So typical of his business-trained mind. Very romantic. "I'm trying," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "I've never done this before." "Asked someone to marry you?" "Loved someone the way I love you." The simple declaration hung between them, honest and unadorned. No grand gestures, no elaborate speeches, just truth, offered without expectation. Leah studied the card in her hand, then the man across from her. She thought of their journey, from cynical test to life-changing connection, from mutual wariness to profound trust. She thought of the foundation they'd built together, the lives they'd changed, the future they could shape. "You're not testing me again, are you?" she teased, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Ethan's smile was gentle, his gaze steady on hers. "No. This time, I'm trusting you." The words echoed between them. A promise, a commitment, a new beginning. "Then yes," she said simply, "to all of it." He rose from his chair, moving to her side of the table. As he knelt beside her, the restaurant faded away. The chandeliers, the white linen, the watching eyes. There was only this moment, this man, this choice that felt like coming home. Their kiss was gentle but certain, sealing a covenant stronger than any legal document. When they separated, Ethan pressed his forehead to hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For finding me when I was lost." Later they walked hand in hand along the Brooklyn promenade, the Manhattan skyline glittering across the water like a constellation of earthbound stars. The night was cool but clear, the autumn air carrying the promise of change. "I never thought my life would turn out like this," Leah admitted, leaning against the railing. "A year ago, I was serving wine to people who didn't see me. Now I'm running a foundation, finishing my degree, getting married." "Having second thoughts?" Ethan asked, only half joking. She turned to face him, her expression serious. "No, I'm having first certainties." He smiled at that, pulling her close against the evening chill. From this vantage point, they could just make out the lights of the Jefferson Youth Center in the distance, the place where their separate paths had converged, where cynicism had yielded to compassion, where testing had transformed into trust. "Look," Leah said softly, pointing to the center. "You can see the main room lights from here." 3 windows glowed warmly in the darkness: the reading corner, the computer lab, the community kitchen. Hope, trust, love. The trinity of lights that had guided them both home. Ethan's arm tightened around her shoulders as they stood together, watching over the city that had brought them together. The white card in Leah's purse, no longer a test, but an invitation, represented not wealth or status, but something far more valuable: belief restored in themselves and in each other. The once-forgotten black card had been a question about human nature. The answer was standing beside him, gazing toward their future, with clear eyes and an open heart.